And hi, everybody. I'm Ankhra, and I'm the president and founder of PS314. And through this process, I actually learned that I'm a few things. So when we talked a little bit, I'm going to start to share my screen just so we can begin. And I've started to use animation, so we'll see how that works out for this particular presentation. But my goal is really to share not only my growth story, but basically how I answered this question. If I disregarded all of the fears and limiting beliefs, could I actually create some type of a world? That was my dream, quite honestly. And I think that when we talked a little bit about this presentation, we talked about aligning your story with your big idea. And to me, your story isn't really about your brand, it's about your values. And so when you think a little bit about how you can build something new, something innovative, you have to know who you are, because that's your contribution to the world. So whenever I'm talking a little bit about my trajectory in the world, I talk about the process I had to go through to get to know myself first, what I could offer the world in a really authentic way, what problem I could solve. So I'm going to walk you through the process that I took. And I think that there are going to be some really helpful tips if you are at all struggling with the next chapter of your life. This might be something that's helpful for you. And so I tend to refer to myself as a social entrepreneur who gives a damn about the world, and I make shit happen, and I use my power for good. So I've kind of moved into a very unapologetic space about my life and my work. And so that's kind of how I'm introducing myself today. When I started this process of developing PS314, I was sitting in an office in Los Angeles, and I was offered a job. It was a dream job for me that I had on my vision board. My vision board's next to me. I make one every year. And I envisioned this potential job, and I really wanted to live in California again and work in this space of social change and entertainment, because I was an impact producer at the time. And I was a little bit tired of all these different corporate environments or even nonprofit environments that were a little toxic because it was very transactional. And I was offered the job, and immediately my spirit said no. And the person who offered me the job asked me why. And I said, because I believe I needed to go figure out if I could actually create the dream that was in my mind, as opposed to supporting someone else's dream. So he gave me two pieces of advice. He said, never do anything alone. And he said, don't worry about the money, just focus on your vision. And I took that into account when I started to just do a little bit of an assessment for myself about what I could potentially offer. So I took that leap of faith. I did not have a lot behind me outside of my experience and my expertise. So this is kind of who I am. I started to ask myself that question. I'm an educator. I'm an adjunct professor at the New School University, but as an educator, I was a bilingual special ed teacher in the 5th grade DC public schools. I'm also a visual artist. So I create works that are from photography to mixed media, and then I put them on products sometimes, or sometimes I just put them out into the world. This is one of my images in the background. I'm also a speaker, obviously, because I love to talk, and I'm an entrepreneur. I've always been a consultant. The primary time of my work life has been as an independent practitioner, as a consultant. I'm a little independent in that way. I've also been an advisor to many people, along with an impact producer, meaning that I'm a filmmaker, but I always think about how can we make an impact with this film as an art. Art is a tool for change in a way, and I'll talk a little bit about what that actually means. I'm a coach, so I support people's development, and then I'm an activist, right? So I had all of these different titles, but what does that even mean? You know, I was kind of in this space. Now, what do I do with my life, right? And so I believe in assessing your values first. I believe in digging a little bit into your core to understand specifically who you are at different points in your life, because based on everything that's happened in your life, you're going to shift a little bit, right? So there's a values index that you can take. It's online, and it'll give you a sense of where you are from the aesthetic space of balance and harmony, economics, how you really think about your economic returns, your individualistic positioning in the world, regulatory meaning structure, if that's important to you, what your theories and practices are as it relates to your understanding of the world, political meaning how you see yourself in control and having influence, and then finally altruist as a humanitarian. And so, if anyone knows me, you might think that the first thing that's going to come up really high will actually be altruist, because I'm an activist and I've been in the nonprofit arena for a really long time, and I've worked in politics, et cetera, and I care about people. I tend to lead with that methodology. But when I did mine, what was really interesting was altruist was kind of average in a way. And so I looked at what did the information tell me? Individualistic was pretty high. And so what they told me was that I demonstrate high independence and project self-confidence. So one of the questions I had to ask myself was, how does that show up for me at work or in life? And, a lot of times I'm the only one in the room. I'm the only one at the table, whether that be my gender, my race, or my generation. And a lot of times it was my race. And so whether I was working for Vice President Gore or I was working for a major global consulting firm, if I didn't see people who looked like me, I would go to the head of that campaign, or I would go to the head of that company, and I would ask for all the Black people. So that's how that showed up in terms of projecting a level of confidence. The aesthetic space, when I lived in California, what I realized was that I loved working virtually. I found the Starbucks in Palos Verdes where I could actually look at the ocean while I worked on my computer. And I promised myself that that was the kind of work-life balance I wanted to incorporate into my life. And so understanding aesthetic is really important. And anyone who works with me also knows I'm a visual learner, and I should get everything once it's designed, or else I'm going to be a pain in the ass. So, aesthetics are also very, very important. In terms of just theoretical, high interest level and understanding all aspects, it's kind of like I like to understand all pieces of the puzzle, not just one piece. I really want to understand how logistically, logically, how do you come to certain conclusions? Because I'm a pretty logical person. So if you can explain to me how you've come to that, I may not agree with you or align, but I can respect it, right? Because I can walk through that. As it relates to economics, it wasn't just about me. I know how to make money. I've always known how to make money, right, in the workforce. That's how I've been able to work independently primarily throughout my career. But I also know how to make other people money. So I've raised over $150 million for philanthropic causes. And I also have employed other people. So that was a pretty average space. In terms of the political, social cachet is not important to me. So I don't take positions for their title, and they're not as important, but I respect them. I respect the networks. I respect people's positions and platforms and the power dynamics, but I think that we can align and leverage it for good. So that's how I see that political space. And then in terms of just like balance and the altruist space, those are there, but they're not as important as the others. So again, asking yourself, once you do your values index, how does it show up in your life so that you can really have a good understanding about who you are right now? Again, you're just doing a lot of information gathering as you kind of walk through this. So I came out of that process saying, well, humanity is at the center of everything that I do. I'm absolutely a strategist and a humanitarian. I am here to be of service, and my goal is to do good, but also to do well. So I don't think you have to sacrifice yourself or your economics, right, to do good in the world. I think it's possible to do both. But the question that was left with me was, how am I going to do this? And how can I help? But then also, who can I help? And I started to think a little bit about who I care about. And I thought about Nina Simone. Let me go back so that I can play it. I'm sorry, guys. Let's see if it'll play this way. Great.
An artist's duty. An artist's duty, as far as I'm concerned, is to reflect the times. I think that is true of painters, sculptors, poets, musicians. As far as I'm concerned, it's their choice. But I choose to reflect the times and the situations in which I find myself. That to me is my duty. And at this crucial time in our life, when everything is so desperate, when every day is a matter of survival, I don't think you can help but be involved. Young people, black and white, know this. That's why they're so involved in politics. We will shape and mold this country, or it will not be molded and shaped at all anymore. So I don't think you have a choice. How can you be an artist and not reflect the times? That to me is the definition of an artist.
So what was really interesting about, and I tend to show that video whenever I teach my class at the New School University, because I really want to talk about what is our responsibility, not only as artists, but really as people, and the people who've taken a leap of faith on our behalf as for our humanity. And Nina Simone certainly did. She saw that it was really important to stand on behalf of her race, of her culture, of my culture, on behalf of her generation, and obviously her gender. And when I think about her story, there wasn't really anyone there to help her. You know, she died not with the wealth that she certainly deserved. And I think that we have come to understand and appreciate her too far later in life. And I know that she struggled, you know. I think about Arthur Mitchell, who sacrificed his own wealth to build Dance Theater of Harlem because he knew that there needed to be an image reflected on the stage, Black ballet, you know, even going so far as to find people who would create the tights in flesh toe for young Black and brown boys and girls. I think about Spike Lee and his unapologetic artistry. I think about Misty Copeland and her presence and what that actually means for people, kind of like that next iteration because of Dance Theater of Harlem. I think about Martin Luther King and other activists who kind of stood on the front lines of equity on our behalf as a society. And so then I start to think, well, what are the organizations, who are the individuals that need support to ensure that they can do good, but also do well? And as an impact producer, I knew firsthand that there just wasn't any place that existed that supported both of those ideas, that they were not mutually exclusive. Could I build something that would support both? So I started to think about, well, what is the real question? I always have to think through driving questions, right? So for me, my question was, what would the world look like if change makers had the power to leverage their greatest potential to ensure equity throughout the world? Like really, as opposed to struggling and sacrificing their livelihoods, their home lives, but to really be provided with all of the support and resources. And I'm not just talking about money, I'm talking about platform and power, everything that I had been exposed to throughout my career. And I wanted to build a place that would support people like the next Martin Luther King, that would support the next Spike Lee, that would support the next Arthur Mitchell. And for sure, I wanted to make sure that the Nina Simone story would never happen again. But what would that actually mean for me, right? So again, coming back to some of my drivers, and I know my values now, so now I have to think about, well, what's driving me in the world? So there are 6 drivers, and 6 drivers for human needs that we all have. Certainty. I am I shouldn't say reformed. I'm a reforming type A person. So I really do like certainty, sense of safety and security, control in some ways. For sure, I know what that feels like. Variety means that you're stimulated by change. Significance is kind of like notoriety, your need for attention, connection, community and collaboration, contribution, something bigger than yourself, and then growth, something to develop. Now, we all have those. None of us are away from these, but at different points in our lives, they're prioritized in different ways. So when I had to think about where I was in this moment, in terms of building this and what was before me, I had to ask myself, well, what's driving me now? And what I knew for sure was that variety was certainly driving me a little bit, right? Because I wanted something different. I knew that I wanted connection with other people and collaboration with the community. I knew I couldn't do it by myself. And I also knew that growth was a very huge driver. I wanted to build something that was bigger, and I wanted to develop myself, accompany other people, support other people. So I had these ideas that were just kind of floating around in my head. But I'm a big believer that you have to start with honesty and truth. And so when I started with that, I always say, SWAT yourself, right? So I swatted myself and my big idea. My big idea was, can I build this agency for community and innovation that was just going to answer that one question? And so I looked at the strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, not only of myself, but also of the idea. So I knew that the methodology that I had as an impact producer to really bring together doing good and doing well works. I knew that I had a great network of people who really cared about the same things that I did. I was equity focused already. I didn't have to build that bridge to it. I had a strong work ethic and I was multi-talented. I knew that there were a lot of people who were experienced out there in the world and who were aligned with me as it related to my methodology and had broader networks, but had a clear understanding of what it really meant to do this type of work, to do good and do well. Here are a couple of weaknesses though, right? You have to kind of think a little bit about, what are your shortfalls? What are some challenges that you have to kind of develop? I didn't know how to position this because it was something brand new and I knew nothing else existed like it. I did not come from a background of wealth, nor did I have a background of working in different communities where I'd get a lot of money. The work that I did was challenging and impactful, but it was not plentiful as it related to financial windfalls. I wasn't quite sure where the starting point was. Like, if you have an idea, how do you actually start? I was a bit emotionally reactive. So it's about 5.5 years ago when I started, but I knew myself and I knew that sometimes I'd over personalize work and I would be somewhat impulsive. So I had to get that under control. I needed to think about building a business plan. What does that mean? I've done it for other people. Could I do it for myself? I also knew that I had a tendency, not necessarily because I wanted to, like what was pulling me was a vision. So I mentioned before, I'll go to someone and I'll say, hey, we're all the Black folks, right? We're all the women. We're all the people who look like me. Why am I the only one in this room? Well, on the other side of that table, someone said, okay, if you want that, you have to go find them. So that's a lot of emotional labor without being compensated. And that just I couldn't sustain that. And so as a woman of color, a Black woman, that happens a lot. You go solve that problem for us. You figure that out. I think we're starting to see that a lot, even more starting to come up. I needed to understand what the operating system might be. And I also had to design and develop a client pool. But here were some opportunities that were available. Technology was allowing us to leverage a virtual space. So that I cared about that, but I also wanted people to be connected everywhere. I didn't want us to only have to be in New York or in Atlanta or in California or in Idaho to get the right expertise and support that was needed to do this work well, to do good and do well. I knew that we were kind of moving into a gig economy space. I also knew that the consulting world was saturated. So lots of people are consultants, sometimes by choice, sometimes by circumstance, but it was siloed, meaning that whatever it was that you knew well and you did well as your practice was the work that you did. But there weren't a lot of multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary practices or consulting agencies that offered fundraising and storytelling and organizational development and social change work the way that I had envisioned PS 314 to do. I knew that overhead expenses were crushing to businesses, so having a virtual company actually might work. I also knew that we had made some progress as it related to white supremacy, as it related to racism, as it related to patriarchy. We're not there, but we're naming it quite a bit. So maybe I could actually be in a leadership position and lift this as I climb. I knew that there was a need for business services for people on the front lines, like the Arthur Mitchells of the world and the Martin Luther Kings of the world, and certainly the Nina Simones of the world. And I knew that there was a pipeline of talent who wanted to do this too. But here were a couple of threats. Business is often assessed by revenue, not impact. And that's a culture that's created. That's a culture that is cultivated. So may not get investment dollars. Again, it's a saturated market. So how do I position myself? I don't even know how to do that. Lots of businesses fail within the first 5 years, and Black women businesses, they fail even sooner. And as a Black woman leader, quite frankly, I'm often looked at as not being investment ready or worthy. So there were a couple of things that I was facing, but the reality is you just have to start. You can't allow any of this. You have to know the information, but you have to think about what's pulling you forward, what vision. And I had this idea and I started to think through, well, how do I define success? What's the new values proposition for me, knowing that there's a lot of opportunity here. We have a lot of strengths, but we certainly have a few different threats. And I thought about what Jay-Z said.
The goal is not to be successful and famous. That's not the goal. The goal is, if you have a specific God-given ability, is to live your life out through that.
Right.
And I think someone can look at him and say, well, he's a billionaire, and so is Beyonce, right? So they have a multi-billionaire family, and so it's much easier for you to say it's not about the money, it's not about being famous. But that really resonated with me, because we all have very special gifts and talents and a vision that has been seated within us that we intend to bring to life. And why not listen to that as opposed to something very different? So when I started to think about the answer to my question, how do I define success? I knew that there were a few different ways that you can think about what's your anchor point. So one could be sustainability, meaning that you just want it to live beyond you. Another could be that you want people to be aware that this model exists and it's out here to be supportive. Some people feel that, defining success means that rapid growth is really necessary. But for me, it was about impact and innovation. So I'm layering on the values, I'm layering on my drivers, I'm layering on my SWOT analysis, and then my success definition. It's all giving me lots of information on how I refine very specifically my story, right? And my unique value proposition in the world. So when I was doing the SWOT analysis, and this happens all the time, you can't be everything to everybody, and you certainly can't do everything. You have to ask yourself who you are in this world and what it is that you absolutely need. So when I was a consultant, I was pretty much the practitioner, meaning that I would do the work. Sometimes I'd hire other people to help me, but for the most part, it was really about me, back and forth. I wouldn't say it was transactional, but for a shortcut, it pretty much was. That was my business model. I would align with projects that I really cared about. I would do the work, and then I'd be done and I'd move on to the next thing. But now I'm talking about building a business, right? And so that means that you have to not only know how to do the work, you also have to know how to manage people and systems and agreements, and then be able to build it as an entrepreneur. And so when you ask yourself who you are, the way I think about this is, if you're a practitioner, you're kind of the person who's building the train. And if you are a leader or a manager, you're the conductor to ensure that the train is actually going to get to the various stops on time. If you're the entrepreneur, you own the railroad. Now, the reason that I bring that forward to you is because everyone is needed, but you can't be all of those things. And by nature, you're probably not. By your experience, you probably are not, but it doesn't mean that you cannot evolve. However, you can't evolve in one moment. So what I started to think about was, well, how do I get from being the practitioner to becoming the leader manager to eventually becoming the entrepreneur? I knew I had to work on that emotional reactiveness. I needed to think about financial sustainability. I had to think about a business plan and a model in terms of the operation system to build this out. So I went through a year-long business program. I had business coaches. I asked all of my mentors to become advisors to the company immediately. I recruited individuals who I respected in the world, who were aligned with my vision for change, to come and do work with me over time. And then I started to look at the finances. So I had to teach myself, but also go to people who have done this before so that I could get to the next phase. So you don't need to, none of us will ever do this by ourselves. And you want to honor the people who are in your life who believe in you, but more importantly, who are aligned with your belief for change. And that's what's always I've been thinking about, is my vision for change, and who are the individuals who would really understand that or have some type of connection to it in some way. And so how do I figure out who those people are? For me, I knew my mission, right? I wanted to be helpful. I wanted to make sure people can do good and do well, meaning that if you're working on equity, you're supporting that work in some way. You should have all of the business services that you possibly need to do your job well, to have that support, whether that's organizational development, storytelling, fundraising, or just thinking about what equity actually means to you. But how would I find them? How would I find the clients, and how would I find the consultants? So a lot of times we talk about your archetype. Who are the personalities that are out there? It's not, whenever you hear people talk about a film and you ask, well, who's your audience? Of the general public. No, it's not. None of the entire general public can never be your audience. You really have to be very specific, as much as you are about your story, your unique value proposition, who you are. So we just went through that whole process of the value index, the SWOT analysis, understanding your drivers, understanding your definition for success. That's critical work. So you better understand who you are in this moment. Do that same analysis for those individuals that you plan to align with to work with you and for you. So what I realized was there were a couple of frustrations and pain points for clients, potential clients, people that I wanted to work with, and then also for consultants. So for consultants, because I was a consultant, I was one of those practitioners, I knew that when you're a consultant, it's feast or famine, it's a roller coaster. How do I make sure that I always have a pipeline of work coming in and also do the work, right? And then manage the relationship and have something else after. So that pipeline of work was important. How do I ensure that people know about me before I walk in the room? It's much easier to negotiate that way. So that's about marketing, right? I talked a little bit in the very beginning about just some of the toxic environments and just the realities that we are not there yet in that world full of equity, and patriarchy lives on, and white supremacy lives on, and all of the isms are indoctrinated into all of our minds, quite frankly, but definitely within all of the institutions. And so it comes up where you're forced to work in a certain way as opposed to the way that is most beneficial and will serve our clients, but then also yourself as a human being, right? So a good example of that is during COVID, I'm sure a lot of you found that there was a split. Some people were driven by humanity and others by capitalism. And how capitalism shows up, if it's not conscious capitalism or compassionate capitalism, it's do all of the work and then you'll be paid for it, right? I want to make sure that you're at your desk, even though we're in the middle of a global pandemic, 8 to 10 hours a day. So I'm going to have I'm going to have something on your computer to make sure that you're typing away or that you're present. Have you checked in with them as a human though? Do they need to go out for a walk sometimes because we're in the middle of a global pandemic? They need to spend time with their children or themselves. There's a lot of different things that were kind of happening. And that was happening even before COVID, before 2020. You could see it come up where people cared more about the bottom line related to dollars, but not to humanity, meaning people. And that was a lot that was happening for a lot of consultants. They were frustrated. They were also siloed. And there wasn't a model where if you lived in Los Angeles, you could work with someone in Iowa and you can have a client in Georgia. So maybe there was something there. There are a lot of frustrations, but there were also a lot of frustrations for the clients. So if you're working on the front lines of equity, a lot of times you're under-resourced. You're untapped for sure, but you're certainly under-resourced. So a majority of folks who are doing that good and great work that we all say we care about now have a budget of less than $500,000. And consulting services range between $10,000 and $40,000 a month, and usually at the higher end. So if you need support, expertise, business expertise to really help to elevate you, like the Amazon model didn't just happen because Jeff Bezos is like a brilliant man. He actually had support. He had business plans designed for him. He had people who'd open doors for him. Well, who's doing that for the NAACP? Who's doing that for the ACLU? Who's doing that for the next Arthur Mitchell, right? I wanted to make sure that it was possible, because if not, they're never going to be able to succeed and always be sacrificing, always be on the front lines, always have emotional labor, be at the very top of their day and be undercompensated. But what were the gains? Well, we could create a new environment. There was a new way for all of us to work together. And what I realized was that there was definitely a need for this work, and we all needed liberation from the old way of working. And my focus wasn't just on the new Spike Lee's or the new Martin Luther King's, but it was also on those individuals who helped them. So PS314 actually supports both the clients and the consultants. And that evolved when I started to think about who has the pain points. I realized it wasn't just the clients, it was also the consultants. It was people like me. So how could I create an environment that supported everybody? I thought, well, this could be the answer for everything. So if our mission is to make sure that everyone can do good and do well, what is our approach that's different than anybody else's? Well, it's multidisciplinary, meaning that we always have a team approach. No one goes at it alone. That was part of the advice that I received in the very beginning. In addition to that, we were virtual, so you can connect and you were not going to be siloed. We have a sliding scale model, meaning that if you're an individual with a new film or a new initiative and you need a startup plan and a new strategic plan, there's a way for us to do it for $2,500. But if you're a major institution with $100 million and hundreds of people who are working in your organization or your company with a double bottom line, we also have a strategic plan that could support you at $20,000 to $30,000 a month. So having that sliding scale meant that we could create an ecosystem where you had folks who were at the grass tops and at the grassroots, and they were connected to each other. And this was a new approach, right? So it wasn't about hierarchy where the consultants were feeding the clients. Instead, it was about, let's just create a partnership. Let's figure out what it is that they need, the client, and what is it that we can offer the consultants. Let's build the team and let's match them up. Let's create a scope of work. So that's our agreement and a timeline. And inevitably, there's going to be impact. So I can tell you that we've raised lots of money. I can tell you that we've aligned our clients and our consultants with really great networks and elevated their profile and branding. But at the end, some of the things that people say that stick with me the most are you added more letters to our alphabet. There's a success story that's happening with us, and it has to do with you. This is not just a company, it's a family. I can be unapologetically Black, woman, trans here. I feel fully accepted. I have fun when I come to work. That's a culture that's being created that's based on my values, but then it's also the values of the people who I've aligned with, right? That I've brought in to support the build out of PS 314. So I could start with how can I help and who can I help? But again, not being able to do it on my own, what happens is the roots of your tree start to flourish because you're really seeding it with your core values, the ones that we've identified really early on. So this is a video and animation we created for the company that I'd love for you guys to watch. I'm Pi, and I'm a matchmaker. PS 314 is my company. It's a matchmaking agency for social change. P represents philanthropy, S stands for strategy, and 3.14 is the perfect formula that goes on and on and on. 3.14 is this infinite number that has all of these possibilities, but the idea is that it creates some solution. It is like the perfect formula, and that's what we aspire to give our clients. We operate at the intersection of philanthropy, storytelling, and social causes. We work with like-minded clients who are also seeking and social causes for a more equitable society. We use a three-pronged methodology to convert interested to invested. It's to engage, educate, and activate individuals. We align people with the resources that they need to amplify and strengthen their work. So sometimes that's their work internally, so it's a building out of their institution or a new startup company, fleshing out a new idea, and then really thinking through who are the right people who should be aligned with them. So envision a bridge, and you have the problems of society on one side, and then you have the solutions on the other. And our job is to figure out where you live on that bridge and who the right people are to help you to do that work the best way possible. And if we do this well, we move the needle and we get closer to the solution. And the solution is a more equitable society. We communicate through storytelling because people remember how you made them feel. They'll remember a story that connects to their heart. I mean, look, we use all the tools, we use strategy and planning and all the best practices in the for-profit and nonprofit world, and we look at your data. Then we translate that into a story of how you envision philanthropy for your world. And then we talk a little bit about the impact you can have. For you to really have an impact in the world, you have to partner with other people. You can't do it alone. Philanthropy is not just for rich people, and philanthropy isn't about rich people, actually. I think that philanthropy is best defined when we open up those doors and we say, you are recognized for your contribution. And that's what we think about. We think about ways that we can leverage that, your talent, your time, or your treasure to support something that is larger than yourself.
It's called a matchmaking agency because love is universal. Our work is grounded in the idea and principles of philanthropy, and philanthropy actually means for the love of humanity.
So we're storytellers, right? So I thought it was really important, and I'm also a Schoolhouse Rock kid. So I thought it was really important for us to have other ways to tell our story and our core values, but also kind of bring to light this idea of what is your mission, what's your approach, and what's your impact. And over time, you know, this has been a company that's been around since 2015. And we started in year one. Pretty much it was me at home, and I had one other consultant that was working with me. We made about $100,000 in revenue, but had no profit whatsoever. We were New York City based, and we had two clients who were arts organizations. I was the only employee. The two of us were two Black women, and we had two virtual platforms, basically Skype and Basecamp. I mean, we also use Marco Polo, to be honest with you, but you know, we were just kind of figuring it out as we went along. That was in year one. And as I mentioned to you, bringing other people in and learning how to scale the business, which is a whole other conversation, has really helped us to grow. And our growth trajectory, to me, speaks to the fact that this is something that was absolutely needed. We started with this idea that we could use art as a tool for change, and then we just evolved and grew and realized that there's so much more out there that we could really do. So where we are at year 5.5 now, I'm still the only employee, but we have 15 contractors who work internally with me. And that basically means that they're working on everything from financial management to marketing to business development and project management as it relates to our clients and consultants. I'm so excited to tell you that we have about 35 project consultants all around the country with about, on average, 25 to 30 years of experience. So altogether, including our clients, it's about 85 to 90 members of our collective. And we are dedicated to equity and intergenerational leadership. So 70% are women, 76% people of color, 25% LGBTQ identified, and 38 clients around the country, 60%, which are women-led companies and organizations. I know that our company sounds like a nonprofit, but it's just simply because it's a new model where it's human-centered and it's really focused on humanity first. That people matter more to me than anything else. And I think you can kind of figure that out based on everything I share with you around my values. And so we have nonprofits and philanthropic institutions, social enterprises, sometimes innovators and artists who come and work with us. We think about this through the lens of equity and justice because that's our goal. And we work with people to support disability rights, veteran rights, LGBTQ rights, racial and economic gender justice, and education justice. And we've had actually now over 60 multidisciplinary projects. And so for us, our theory of change is incorporating social justice, philanthropy, storytelling, organizational development, all together. And we know that it works because over this period of time, we've been able to secure 2.7 million in revenue. I reinvest that right back into our consultants and contractors. So 1.7 million goes right back into the marketplace. We have invested about 500,000 into the company, and that's just about scaling. And now we've evolved from just using Marco Polo and Skype to using Zoom, which is what we're all on now. And we also have a host of other platforms, including Pipedrive, which is our CRM, Dropbox, and Basecamp, amongst others. So that's kind of our evolution over time that we've gotten to. But there are a couple of things I want to leave you with, some things that I think are going to be really helpful. If you go through this process, I think you'll get a good sense of who you are and then how you can bring who you are to bear in the marketplace. I'm a big believer that you should do good and do well. So I'm going to push and hope that you do that. But there are a couple of things that might just kind of get in your way. So I'm going to give you a couple of different tips. One is you got to manage your time really well. My business coach in year 2.5 told me that everything I wrote down had the word stress on it. And he told me that stress is actually the adult word for fear, which is absolutely the truth. And he said, so you're fearful, and that's fine. You know, a lot of people, you know, we all have fear, that's for sure. But I think that it's getting in your way, because what I kept saying to him was I was stressed because I had no time to do everything. And he was suggesting to me that I wasn't accounting for my time, and I had to own it. So he introduced me to this concept of the various realms of time. So if you think about what makes your life fulfilled, don't just think about it from the perspective of work, like I have to go and pitch a client, or I have to go to a meeting, or I have to build a network, or, you also want to think about, do you have to go to a yoga class? Do you want to go on a date? Do you have to go for a walk? Do you need to take a nap? Whatever it is that you need in your zone that is defined by creating a holistic life for yourself, that is your zone. That's where you should operate more than 50% of the time, ideally more than 70%, but most of us don't. There are other things that pull your time out. So demand is when someone's calling you and saying, hey, do you have 5 minutes? Can we go to lunch? I need to pick your brain. Can I call you? That's when you're supporting their zone. It happens, it's fine. But if you're doing it more than you're doing it for yourself, it's a question to ask. Distraction. I don't know if anyone else is a procrastinator. I certainly can be. And so that's usually when I completely get distracted. Now I'm absorbing 5 to 10 hours of my time dealing with something that could have been done in an hour. And then my favorite is delusion. And that's the time that we're not accounting for. So I think a lot of us are on social media, and you can just that can absorb a lot of your time, but so can online gambling, so can TV watching, really anything. And it's not a judgment. It's just for you to get a good sense of, where am I spending my time if it's outside of my zone? And why am I doing that? If this is what I'm trying to do with my life and my work, why not give a little bit more time to focus on supporting a more holistic life? So that's something for you guys to think a little bit about for the future. I also recommend that you build your support system. So I believe teamwork makes the dream work, and I could not get here if it wasn't for the sweat equity and the belief systems of my advisors, of the people who advocated for me to walk indoors, especially when I was the only one, people who would fund. And I think about investment financially as like, they took a chance and they hired us, or they took a chance and they said, I'll cut my fee just so I can work with this group. I'm going to try out this new system, and they're still with us today. A connector who says, you have to know so-and-so. We all kind of know people who have bigger platforms, bigger networks. Tap into them. Not everybody is about investing in your company. People are aligned with your values and your mission for change, or for your work and your story. Give them a role in your life to really kind of help you get to where you want to go. The last couple of things I'll talk about is your practice. And so you want to think a little bit about really building out your own strategic plan. So every week or every 2 weeks, you just build out 2 to 4 hours that you're focused on the growth of your big idea. And for each of those blocks of time, they should be different, and you should have different people who are with you thinking about it. So maybe some are about finance, so maybe some's about marketing, maybe some's about like developing the idea and iterating a little bit. And think about the people who you can have around the table to be your brain trust, to really help you get focused and be clear about how best to get there. Your SWOT's going to tell you what you know and what you don't know. Knowing who you are, whether you're a practitioner or a leader or entrepreneur, will also tell you who you need. So there's a lot of information there, and you can leverage it to build your own strategic plan to get you to really kind of develop the right thing. I believe that everything is possible, but I'm going to leave you with a couple of things. Know who you are and know who you're not. What you do well and what you don't, because we do not all do everything well. And it's good to continue to learn. I grew a lot over the last 5.5 years, and I would not have been able to do that if I wasn't challenged with this big idea, but also this growing collective and ecosystem that I was kind of cultivating over time. So you have to know who and what you need. You have to understand the problem you're solving and for who. You just can't be out there. You really have to be specific and define the impact that you seek to have. It's going to help other people tell your story on your behalf. And then here's my girl, Nina, who's my favorite.
Like, I'll tell you what freedom is to me. No fear. I mean, really, no fear. If I could have that half of my life, no fear. Lots of children have no fear. That's the closest way, that's the only way I can describe it. That's not all of it, but it is something to really, really feel.
Have you like, no. I've noticed.
Like a new way of seeing. A new way of seeing something.
So the thing
Like,
about,
I'll tell you what freedom is to me. No fear. I mean, really, no fear. If I could have that.
the thing about doing any of this, especially as women of color, is that we've been told and socialized and indoctrinated into this belief that we can't do it, or that we can only do it if we're doing it for somebody else. So you really do have to liberate your mind from it all. And that's why I think it's important to start with yourself and understand who you are and know what you've done. You know, if you're even on this call, the fact that you're here is because you've done a significant amount. And now maybe you're trying to think about what comes next. You want to bring all of that with you. You want to bring all the people who love you and care about you and support you to go to that next chapter. I'll certainly help you. I'm going to offer a 30-minute coaching session for anyone who wants to. Oleander's on here as well. And so you can email her and we'll schedule it for you in the next month or two, whenever you need it, just to kind of talk it through. You know, I can offer you a brain to trust and support you in the work. But thanks so much for taking some time out. I hope it was really helpful for you all. I've enjoyed talking to you for sure. And I guess we'll open it up for some questions.